Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be building the backend for a to-do app using Visual Backend, which is an interface that makes backend development much simpler, as well as Supabase as the DB and auth provider. So I've already built the front end using Next.js, as you can see over here, and what we're going to do is run through each endpoint and implement it using Visual Backend, and then see how that works in the context of this to-do app. So let's get started, and the first thing that we're going to do is implement this sign up endpoint. So if I just show you this function over here, what we're doing on the client side is essentially signing up to Supabase auth, all right, on the client side. And then we're going to get a token, which we can then use to make an authenticated request to insert a new user inside our Supabase user table. So what that means is that we'll create a new user inside this auth table over here. And then we also want to create a new user inside this user table through an authenticated request to our backend, all right? So let's implement this function, all right? If we come over here, you can see that it makes a request, a post request to this endpoint. And more than that, it also goes through this interceptor over here, which says that if the URL contains this auth prefix, we then want to attach the authentication token to the authorization header, all right? So let's come over to Visual Backend here and create a new middleware called log just to see what requests are coming in. So I'm going to write console.log, request.method, request.url, and then say next, like that. And then let's add Supabase to our project. So I'm going to add our API keys here, paste that in, like so. And now as you can see, we have this middleware function over here, which we're going to use. And so what this does is that it decodes the authorization header. Sorry, it decodes the token, which is attached to the authorization header in the bearer token format. All right. And so we're going to store the user ID inside the request object like that. And now we're going to use this middleware function here. So let's create a new group called auth. And in this group, all our requests will be authenticated. So let's create a middleware here called auth. All right. And just simply call that function. So now let's implement the post user endpoint. So I'm going to create a group called user, create a new function called a new endpoint called post, like that. So this is /auth/user. And now I'm going to get if we come over here, we're getting the email and username from the request body. All right. Like that. And then we also want the user ID from the request object, which we got from this auth middleware over here. And so we can now create a new function under Supabase. Let's create a new table called user, which is just a group, a function group. And I'm going to create a new function called create user, like that. And so in here, as you can see, we have function generator because we use the Kickstart with AI feature. All right. But anyways, let's fix that. I think that's wrong. But other than that, everything looks fine. So if we come over here and say await create user, like that, pass in the user ID, email, username, put that in a try catch block. And user creates it. If not, failed to create user. All right. And now let's test this function out. So I'm going to run the server like that. And if we come over here, let's fill that up. All right. So the password is 567890. You can see if we come to our server, we made a request to this endpoint. And also if we come to Supabase, we now have a new entry in our user table, which has the correct user ID that is linked to this user in the auth table. So we've successfully done that. And now the next thing that we want to implement is actually creating a new to-do. So we come over here. Let's go to this component. This function executes. And so in this function, what happens is that we make a request to this endpoint over here, /auth/todos, passing in the title and completed for the new to do. So title is just what the to do is, completed is whether the to do is completed. And so in here, once we've done that, we get a new to do from this endpoint, and then we set that in the new state. All right. So let's implement that. Over here in this user group, let's create a new function called, let's create a new group called to do. All right. And create a new function called create to do, like that. And so if you remember over here, we also want to get the new to-do return from the backend. And the reason for that is because when we insert a new to-do inside this table, all right, we want to get the newly inserted ID, the to-do ID, which we need to get from the backend. So in this function, I'm going to write .select like that, which should return the new to-do. And I think it returns an array. So this should be data index 0, like that. And now we can come to our routes and create a new group called to-dos. And in this group, we're going to create a new post request to create a new to-do. And so in here, if you remember just now, we got the title and completed, the request body, we want the user ID from the request object. And the reason for this is that each to-do is linked to a user. All right, so if you come over here, that's the user ID field, and that's how we can identify the user's to-dos. So if we come over here, let's call that function, create to-do, like that, pass in the user ID, title, and completed, and we're going to get back the new to-do, like that, and we return that to the user. So to-do. And I'm not too sure what's happening here, so let's just restart the server. Does that work? All right, nice. So let's test this out. If I come over here, I'm gonna write finish homework, for example. I'm gonna create, and hopefully that works. Nice, it works. And if we come over to our to-do table, you can see that we have a new to-do, all right? Linked to this user ID. So the next thing that we're going to work on is actually updating the to-do. And for this particular function, there are two ways we can update. Firstly, we can update the text, which is the title, or we can also update if it's completed. But either ways, we're going to make one request to the backend. So if we come over to this to-do component here, which is what renders this particular section of the UI, you can see that when in this function handle change, as well as this function checkbox clicked, we are calling this update to-do function, which makes a request to the auth/todos/to-do ID endpoint, which is a put request. So let's work on that now. I'm going to create under here a new put request, but this is going to be a little bit special because we're going to use a dynamic route. And so the route param will be to-do ID to identify which to-do ID we need to update. All right, and so in here, we're going to take the, let's see what it is we're passing in, the title and completed. And we're going to update both at the same time. If the client doesn't want to change one, he just will send the same data, all right, for one of the fields. But anyways, let's do that. And we also want to get the user ID because we need to check that the to-do that's being updated belongs to the user that wants to update it, all right? So that's why we're getting the user ID. Sorry, that should be request dot. And lastly, we also want to get the to-do ID, which comes from the param, the request param. Okay, so let's get that. And so now let's create a function inside Supabase called update to-do, like that. I guess it should really be called update to-do by ID, but it's fine. So in here, we have let's pass in the to-do ID, user ID, and in here, we can match those. So to-do ID and user ID, like that. And now coming back here, we can call that function await update to-do and pass in the to-do ID. To-do ID, user ID, as well as title and completed. So this is the data that is being updated. And then after that, we can return a status of 200 to the user. All right, so I think that's fine. And if we come back to the client, we can try this out. So I'm going to just try to click this checkbox over here, which will send this update to do request. So let's do that. And we can see that we got a new request. All right, perfect. And if we come over here, we can see that the completer has become true. And now let's test out this thing here, which is finish, let's say reading. And if we unfocus, it will send that to do request. So if we come over here, we can see that it changed, perfect. But to do is now false. So that is a bit of a problem. And if we come over here, let's see what's wrong. Sorry, this should be to-do.completed. So this shouldn't change. So let's do that again. Change that, see if it works. All right, false. Change that, is it true? And then if we come here and say finish homework, all right, that remains true and that changes. All right, perfect. So we fixed that. So now we can move on to the last function for our to-dos, which is to actually delete it. So if we come over here, you can see we have a handle delete function, and it makes a request over here to auth/to-do/to-do ID. All right, so let's come over here and create a new function called delete to-do, like that. And this fly. And anyways, over here we need to once again match the to-do ID as well as user ID. And so, because we can't let a user delete a to-do that is not his, right? So anyways, let's put that in like that. And then if we come over here, we can create a new function called delete to-do ID, like that. And in here, let's get the user ID from the request object, get the to-do ID from the params, like that. Wait, delete to-do, right? And wrap that in a try-catch block. So all right, and now we can test this out. So if we come over here and click this button, you can see that that's gone. So perfect. All right, so the next thing that we want to do, let's just create a few to-dos here. Finish homework, and then maybe cook dinner and read book. All right. You can see that if I refresh this page, everything actually goes away. And so what we need to do is, if we come over here, let's see, app page, right? We need to fetch the to-do data from the backend when we render this page. And so what I'm going to do here is call this function, let to-dos data await fetch to-dos, all right? And so if we come over here, we have this endpoint that actually, and this fails because we're returning a 404 here. But anyways, we have this function that fetches from this /auth/to-dos endpoint. All right, so we're going to implement that now. We come over here, let's create a new get request. And this is going to allow a user to get his to-dos. Okay, so we're going to get the user ID from the request object again, because this is authenticated endpoint. And then let's create a new function here called get user to-dos, like that. And in here, you can see that everything looks fine. So we get the to-dos that matches the user ID, return the data, and I think this should be like that. So in here, we say let to-dos equals await, get user to-dos, like that, pass in the user ID, and then return that to the client. So let's wrap that in a try-catch block. Right, now we can test this out. If we come over here, refresh that, you can see that we get our to-dos. And if I delete that and refresh again, it stays the same. All right, so that's nice. And the next thing that we want to do is actually fetch the user data. So if you remember, we inserted a user in the user table through this endpoint over here. And so we should make use of that data. And I'm going to say welcome particular username. All right. So like this particular function, we're going to do the same thing and call a function called await fetch user, right? If we come here, it makes a request to this endpoint /auth/user. And so I'm going to come to Visual Backend and create a new endpoint called get user, like so. And in here, let's create a new function like that. I'm going to create a new function inside Supabase here called get user. All right. And then here, we're going to pass in the user ID and match that to, this should be user ID. And then we can return that. So I'm going to come here. Sorry, here. Say let user equals await get user ID, that's our status, send user, wrap that in a try catch block. All right, and so now if we come back over here, and I'm going to pass this user data into this user data here, you can see that we render the username over here. And you can see that we got that out over here. So everything works fine. You can see that we made the endpoint. And that's pretty much it. So throughout this tutorial, we built a backend that made authenticated requests to create a user and then also get his data, as well as perform create, read, update, delete operations on the user's to-dos. So I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.